I noticed a few glaring issues this past week that I wanted to go over really quick. Number one, a few people were looking at our refresh scripts for insert statements and learning some bad habits, namely the idea of adding these null values in our columns. Remember that these inserts are generated by a database system, and therefore the database system knows that those values are supposed to be null. You should not be entering null values. You should be letting any potential defaults and such be taken care of by the database. What I mean by that is we know that this is Lime Odyssey, it's fantasy, the fee is $0, and that it's downloadable, but we don't know whether it's PvP. We don't know whether it's got a release date or a game rating. Well, we shouldn't be including those columns at all. We should be writing our insert statements with no nulls, just like so, because we're using the information we have, not the information we don't. Whoops, I left a P in there. Okay, so your insert statement should not have nulls. That's just one big thing. If you had that, you really shouldn't. And if you'd like to get further clarification, just ask me again between classes. Moving on, I actually am not using the refresh script for today's example. I'm actually going to be creating kind of a mock-up of something similar to what our game table has, just because I need it for some examples here. I've got the original game table that we have, the original game fields, but I've also added in an average playtime, which is going to eventually be a time field. We're starting off with it as a text field, a variable character field, because I want to talk about a particular topic. And then we have game description, which will eventually be a 500 character field, but again, starting with 400 because I need to use it for an example. I'm going to first create this table just like so. I have a game table already, so I'm going to run this drop table on it. Drop. Says commands completed successfully. You'll notice if I try to run drop table again that it tells me it can't drop the table because it doesn't exist. Seeing a lot of people run into this error and think that something's wrong. The only thing that's wrong is that you don't have a table to drop with the drop table. Drop is for deleting, and it's just a command. It just tells the database to do something. So when you run drop table, it permanently affects it over here. Again, if your tables are not reflecting what your errors are telling you, then make sure to refresh. So right click, refresh, right? Or right click on your database, refresh, and then reopen your tables folder, right? Same thing with create table. If I run create table, it goes just fine, but it's not showing in my tables folder. I hit refresh, it comes back. If I try to run my create table statement again, I get a similar error. It says there's already an object named game. That's because I'm just trying to do the same thing twice. This is nothing more than an instruction, and once it's run, it doesn't affect the database anymore. If you try to execute it a second time, it's like running it all over again. It's like having it twice in a row. So yeah, if you see already an object named game, all you need to do is confirm that your command was already run, and you don't have to run it again. There's nothing wrong with it at that point. You may also know that if you do an edit IntelliSense refresh local cache at this point, and if you didn't have a drop table, you might have got a red line here saying there's already an object named game. Again, same problem, same fix. It's just that there's nothing actually wrong. You created the table already, and you don't have a drop table statement beforehand, like so. If you had the drop table, the IntelliSense would say, oh, well, I have a table named game, so I can drop it, and I don't need to create that table. Now, if I dropped the game table, so I'm going to execute the drop table game, you can see game still exists there. I'm going to hit refresh, so it's gone. The server no longer has my game table. Now I'm going to refresh my local cache, and you can see drop table again has the same error, cannot drop it because it doesn't exist. Okay, so just a quick kind of overview for you. Now the other thing is I may get some errors down here later on if I don't have the create table statement, but since I do, IntelliSense knows that the table exists, and it kind of doesn't give me any trouble with any future select statements. All right. So let's look at insert statements and the identity specification. When we put the identity specification on the table, what it's saying is please automatically fill in this ID column with a number for me. So for identity fields, it must be an integer column, and identity also must be the primary key. So you see game ID is the primary key, and game ID is an integer, and game ID is the identity. So those are kind of three parts that go together, all hand in hand. This 1, 1, just leave it as is. What it means is the first record starts at 1, and every record after that increases by 1. So game ID will be 1 on the first record, 2 on the next record, and so on. Okay, so we've got an issue with cannot insert explicit value for an identity field. So I'm just going to try to run an insert statement into game. And I'm going to put in a game ID, game name. The rest I'm just going to leave empty because I'm trying to focus on a particular issue here. So game ID, maybe I'll put in a 13. I don't want to put in quotes, it's a number. So ID is an integer field. There's something else wrong with what I'm doing here, but just remember when you're putting in numbers, measurable numbers, don't bother putting quotes around them because you don't want to have mistakes that could come up later. It's just a bad habit to be in. So game name, I'm going to put in example game. That's it. The rest can be empty. There's no required fields. So it says, cannot insert explicit value for identity column in table game when identity insert is set to off. Alright, so let's just rewrite this here so I can only put in game ID, and you can see I still get the same problem. Okay, but if I get rid of the game ID column and I don't affect the game ID column, now it allows me to enter that row. Okay. What it's saying is that if I try to enter this and provide a value for the identity column, then I'm trying to circumvent what I've asked the database to do. I've already, by saying this is identity column, I've asked the database to take care of it for me, and I'm trying to overwrite it. Now, there are some very, very far edge cases where this is something you want to do. So when you go to find out, okay, how do I put in a game ID, even though it says that, your internet search might come up with an example like this. Oh, well, you should change the identity insert value for game. This is bad. This is very bad. Now, let me show you why. If I try to do a set identity insert game on, it will allow me to enter the game ID and I get a new issue. It's violation of primary key constraint game ID. Basically, in order to enter a game ID, you would have to know all the other IDs that are in the table, no matter how many records, and there could be thousands of them, and make sure that you don't enter the same one twice. The whole reason for having the identity is so that the game table can completely take care of that for you. So if I run this now it says explicit value must be entered for the identity column, and that's because I set identity insert on, and that's a setting on the database engine, so I have to turn it off. Now I can let the database have control of that. You can see how confusing and irritating that can get. So just don't enter an ID field. Let the database take care of it when you're inserting, and don't try to change it in an update either. Okay, so another thing people have seen is data will be truncated errors. That happens when your text is too long for your field size. Okay, so what I've done is I've set up a game description field to allow for 400 characters, and you'll find in a moment, so I'm just going to run those guys. So I now have an empty table. This is just my way again of looking at what's in the table. All right, I have an empty table, and I'm just going to put those values in there, and oops, my first row went fine, second row went fine, but the third one says string or binary data would be truncated. Problem is that my description here is a little longer than the allowable number of characters. So it's probably in the 450 area or something along those lines instead of the 400 that I've allowed. So I'm going to up my description to 500. So I'm going to just drop create and select, so you can see I've selected, there's nothing left in there again, and I'll run those inserts again, and my truncation is taken care of. Now let's talk about entering numeric data into bit fields. So that's where we would say insert into game, and let's put in game name, and just the game is downloaded. column. And we'll put in some values, and the game name will just be example game. And the value, if I put in 25, what happens is, let's again select everything from game. Oop. Here's this game that I just added, and under game is downloaded, there's a 1. I put in a 25. Basically, if you put in bit data, any values over, any non-zero values are automatically changed to 1 for bit fields. Okay. Entering fractional data into decimal 0x0 field. I'm not going to go back and change the table, but basically, for example, for this value here, 1297, on my game fee is currently decimal 6.2. If it were a decimal 6,0, 1297 for 6.2 becomes 1297. And 1297 for a decimal 60 becomes 13. What happens is kind of like the string truncation, your decimal field will just take off anything that it can't handle. In the case of decimal, it also rounds it to the nearest low precision value or lowest precision digit that you have. So if it was 12.4, it would probably end up being 12, but if it's, since it's 12.97, it ends up being 13. All right. So moving on, a few reasons why we should use non-text data for quantifiable or measurable data. Let's get rid of that while there. That's a mistyper. Okay. What do I mean by that? So quantifiable or measurable data includes any number. So we can count things or we can measure them using, numbers. The same thing for dates and for times. Those are just measurements of our passage through space. So we represent them with time values because it's easy for us to deal with them in small chunks, but really they're still a measurement from the beginning of some time to the end, which is why we have years 0 to 2017 to 10,000 that we're heading toward. So let me show you what happens. Now I'm just going to go back here for a second. Remember, we have used a text field here, and when we order text, it gets ordered alphabetically. That totally makes sense. Now if we put numeric or measurable data in a text field, this is what happens. I'm going to grab everything from the game field and I'm going to order it by our game, not fee, average playtime. Okay. What I get is, we can ignore the example game. In fact, I'm going to delete the example game really quick. Delete from game where game ID was 4. There we go. So let's try that again. Okay, you can see the game IDs are not in order, so clearly these are not in the order they were inserted in. So the order by has taken everything and said, all right, let's put it in order by the average play time. And if you have a look, I've got an hour, 15 minutes, 30 seconds. I've got 15 minutes. I've got 45 minutes. That's not in any order, in fact, because we've got the smallest number in the middle, the highest on the top, and something medium on the bottom. That's because what's happening is it's trying to order by characters like it would alphabetically. If it was A, it would go A, then B, C, D, and then here the same thing. Each of these characters has a character value, and that's how it's ordered, so one character at a time. If we want to order it by numbers, we have to store it as numbers. So that's one reason why why you want to make sure that you're using number fields or date fields correctly. So anything that's not really a string, make sure you're using a good data type for it. So let's look at the game Repulse. That's the third game I entered here, okay? We're going to increase the average playtime. So it's update game set, and I'm just going to put a equals, let's go 1 equals 1. Can't do that, can I? Game fee equals 1, there we go. Where, no, I'll do the where afterwards, okay. So set game average playtime equals game average playtime plus, what's it, 12 minutes 20 seconds, maybe 12:20, where game name equals repulse. Okay. So our update worked perfectly. I wonder what happened to our game average playtime. If I hit execute, oh look, repulse. We have added 12 minutes and 20 seconds to the average playtime, but because it's text, when we added it, it became appended on, because that's the way when you add two text things together, that's what happens. Since we're dealing with numbers, we should be dealing with a number field, or dates, times, whatever. We should be dealing with the appropriate field type in order to be able to handle it better. So let's fix the table and try this stuff again. I'm going to go back and I'm going to change this to a time field. There's still a problem, but let's just begin with this. We've got nothing left in our game table again. I'm going to insert everything here. Hit execute. It says conversion failed when converting date and or time from character string. What the problem is? Well, what we have here is 45, what we think says 45 minutes 15 seconds. When we entered the data like this, it's minutes. We think it's minutes comma seconds. It's actually hours comma minutes. So it can't convert 45 hours to a time of day. These denominations should be in 24s. And it should be under 24. So if I tried to insert that, that would work, right? So that's one of our problems. You can see if I try to insert it like this, conversion failed, right? That's because we've got to make sure that we're looking up how to enter our time values properly and entering them correctly. So we lead with our hours, then we have minutes, then we have seconds. Here this is good. It's already got hours, minutes, seconds. And here we need hours, minutes, seconds. Okay. So run that insert. Select everything from game again. You can see now it's got these extra zeros. People kind of got worried about those. Nothing to worry about. Extra zeros are perfectly normal. That's just fractions of a second. If you really want to get rid of them, you can add a 0 here, which will tell time to not have that extra precision on the seconds. But that's not required. That's fine to have the extra seconds there. The data is still stored in the background either way. So we've already fixed the table, but let's try ordering now. And you can see it's 15 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour and 15 minutes. So using the right data type and putting in the right data is pretty important. Now if I update, data types time and varchar are incompatible with the add operator, right? So you'll find immediately that we can no longer add these things together the same way. So I've pulled up the Microsoft documentation for the date add function, which we can use to add parts to the date. So what we need to do, instead of adding things by using the plus sign in the first place, is to say it equals to date add, and then we have to give it minute intervals, which is minute, and take the first one and we say 12. Okay, so we want to add 12 minutes 20 seconds. Well, we need to kind of nest that in. I'm not going to make it overly complicated, so we're just going to leave it at 12 minutes. But just suffice it to say, you would have to add seconds to the result of adding minutes. I'll just keep it simple. I'm going to take out the 20 seconds. So if I run that, oops, make sure that you're paying attention to what you're adding to. So we've got date part, a number, and a date. So it should be 12 to average gameplay time, not the other way around. Now if I run it, one row is affected. If I grab my records again, you can see that it's gone from 12 minutes to 27 minutes. Sorry, 15 minutes to 27 minutes.